If you join those dots together, it looks like a financial deal that puts Farage in charge of the party, moves Richard Tice away from the leadership, and pays off Richard Tice. That's what the collective set of dots, if joined up in the way that the various papers have disclosed it, would yield. But then things get into a bit of a mess for Farage, and I'm afraid for Richard Tice as well, because Farage is now on the record saying that he had no intention of coming back until the 3rd of June, and that he was not politically active before the general election.
The Insight Sunday Times investigation team have discovered that Nigel Farage struck a secret deal with the then leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, and the convicted fraudster George Cottrell to return as leader of the party in March 2024, several months before he's previously claimed to have made the decision. Under the terms of the deal, the Sunday Times says, once Farage became leader, Reform would repay or write off more than £1 million in outstanding loans it had received from Richard Tice's company. The deal was first presented by Farage and Cottrell to the party's treasurer in mid-May. The allegations undermine Mr Farage's claim that he had no intention until June 2024 of returning to frontline politics. Let's hear what he had to say back then in June 24 when he announced his return.
I'm coming back as leader of Reform UK, but not just for this election campaign. I'm coming back for the next 5 years. I am going to stand in this election. I'll be launching my candidacy at midday tomorrow in the Essex seaside town of Clacton. So midday tomorrow, Clacton, at the end of the pier.
History is at the moment repeating itself, but we won't get into that. Let's instead speak to Ben Habib, who was the deputy leader of Reform UK when the deal was struck. Good morning, Mr Habib.
Good morning.
So I've been looking at the timeline on this. Early in 2024, Nigel Farage receives £5 million from Christopher Harben, the crypto billionaire. In March or April 24, Farage and Tice strike this deal, which is the new information under the supervision of George Cottrell. 9th of May, Fiona Cottrell donates £250,000 to Reform, then another £250,000 to Reform, and then the election is called. Now, you were deeply, then unfortunately you got demoted when Nigel Farage decided to rejoin the party and stand for that seat in Clacton. Just tell us if you knew anything about these arrangements that were taking place under the auspices of the convicted fraudster George Cottrell.
Well, this, for me, personally at least, is horrific because I was deputy leader of the party at the time. Thousands of activists and I were pounding the pavements across the country, going to rallies, getting the troops together, putting Reform UK on the map, and doing all of this without a penny of payment. And while we were doing this, the leadership were making financial deals for the change in leadership without any of us being consulted, without any of us being informed. And I was gobsmacked when Farage came back in to lead the party on the 3rd of June, because nothing had been disclosed to me about any intention of doing it. The first I heard of Farage wanting to lead the party was when he called what he described as an extraordinary press conference the morning of the 3rd of June. I texted Richard Tice many times during that day asking him what the subject of that press conference would be. And lo and behold, no answer came, but Farage turned up on the podium and appointed himself leader. And clearly, this followed the deal that he had with Richard Tice.
And the deal was, it seems to be, although this isn't made explicit in the Sunday Times today, that if Farage was going to come back and effectively replace Richard Tice, then Tice wanted repayment on the loans that his company had paid to Reform. And this was agreed, it seems, because the money started going back to Richard Tice, not his company, but back to Richard Tice shortly after Farage made his announcement. And yet money then went in the other direction on the same day back to Reform UK from one of Richard Tice's companies who had received a donation from Fiona Cottrell, George Cottrell's mother. Are you more upset about the way that this deal was cooked up, or do you think something potentially more serious has happened here?
Well, Farage clearly decided that he wanted to come back as leader. And that decision, it would appear, based on what the Times has revealed, took place before the general election. At the same time, Christopher Harborne, on the 5th of April, I think, according to Christopher Harborne declarations, donated £5 million to Nigel Farage, apparently without strings attached, though The Guardian has now claimed that the £5 million was the equivalent of the £1 million a year that Farage would lose in income if he came back to lead the party. And it also transpires now, according to The Guardian, that contrary to what Harborne and Farage say, that the money was paid on the 5th of April, actually some of that money continued to come in even after the general election had been called. So there's a very significant circumstantial coincidence, at the very least, between £5 million coming into Farage's personal pocket and a deal apparently being done for the change in leadership between Tice and Farage. And if you join those dots together, it looks like a financial deal that puts Farage in charge of the party, moves Richard Tice away from the leadership, and pays off Richard Tice. That's what the collective set of dots, if joined up in the way that the various papers have disclosed it, would yield. But then things get into a bit of a mess for Farage, and I'm afraid for Richard Tice as well, because Farage is now on the record saying that he had no intention of coming back until the 3rd of June, and that he was not politically active before the general election.
And this is crucial because, therefore, he says he didn't have to declare that £5 million donation.
Absolutely. It's crucial because if he had been politically active, he should have declared the £5 million that he got from Christopher Harborne. And there is no way to hide the fact that you've been politically active if you've been actively negotiating a deal that brings you back in as leader. That is the biggest smoking gun, if you like, of your political activity. And so it blows a hole completely in Farage's story that he was not politically active before the general election. And that gives a massive bit of evidence over to the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner and indeed the Electoral Commission, who both of which I understand are looking at this affair and all the money that changed hands in and around that period. But there are also problems here now for Richard Tice, because some of that money, if you read the Times article carefully, some of the money that should have been repaid to Richard Tice's company, because it was Richard Tice's company that had lent money to Reform UK.
Tyson Investments,
Tyson Investments was actually paid to Richard Tice personally, and that wasn't disclosed to the Electoral Commission.
Well, I do want to ask you about this because, again, in today's Sunday Times, Murtash Azami, who was the party treasurer at the time, said he saw this apparent mistake, that it was mistakenly repaid to Richard Tice's account personally, the £200,000. He said this is a direct quote, he tried to notify the Electoral Commission but was stopped. I was not allowed to make it right. But he doesn't say who stopped him.
Yeah, I mean, and that in itself is extraordinary, that Murtash Azami, the treasurer, would rightfully wish to correct the record, and it could have been corrected. Of course, errors are made, and records do get corrected after errors are made. But if you've been prevented from correcting the error, then you have to question what the hell has been going on. And the other point, which is more tangential and perhaps a bit complex, is that the donation apparently made by Fiona Cottrell to another one of Tice's companies, Britain Means Business, of £1 million, I think on the 10th of June. Half of that was then donated by Britain Means Business to Reform, and the vast majority of that was used to repay Tice and Tice's company. So it looks like...
Well, on top of that, The Guardian have reported that Fiona Cottrell has declared that money came from her son, George.
Yeah, so if that's the case, that means there's been a misdeclaration on who the true donor is, which is, again, a breach of electoral law. It's a criminal act. Withholding your identity when making a donation is a criminal act. Failing to declare monies you've received when you should have declared them is potentially a criminal act. These are very, very serious allegations that are being made against Farage, Reform UK, and now Richard Tice.
And you say you had absolutely no sense that this backroom deal was being struck that led to your demotion as deputy leader. And when you did see that press conference on the 3rd of June, which you say you knew nothing about, what was your reaction? What questions did you start asking of the party that you were part of?
Well, I had been arguing from before I even joined Reform that the party should be democratized. And I failed to win my way with Tice before I joined the party. Indeed, by the way, if I can digress for a second, when I was invited to join the party by Tice, one of the reasons I initially declined to join, there are 4 or 5 reasons I gave Tice for not accepting his kind invitation. And one of them was concerns about the money behind the party. But after I got reassurances from Tice that everything would be fine, I joined the party.
I want to know what happened after it became clear that Farage was now going to be leading Reform UK on 3rd of June.
And as part of that discussion that I had with Tice before I joined the party, I was making the point that you must democratise the party. You can't have one man, Nigel Farage, controlling a political party. And when I discovered that afternoon, along with everyone else at the press conference, that Farage had appointed himself leader without a contest, without any discussion, without any notification to the senior-most people in the party, I immediately texted Richard Tice and said, right, we may be in the middle of a general election, but this party now must democratise. This cannot go on. We must have checks and balances in the party. As soon as this general election is over, we must democratise the party. And you may or may not know, you may or may not recall, but after the general election was over, after I was demoted as deputy leader, I then did fight a 6-month campaign to democratise the party, in significant part because of this kind of thing. And no party can survive, no organisation, no institution can survive if it does not have proper governance in place.
Sure. How did you think the party was being financed? Because Richard Tice's donations in 23 had basically kept the lights on at the Reform UK's headquarters. Now he was being repaid, and suddenly this influx of money via Christopher Harborne and Fiona Cottrell had come into the organisation. Were you not asking questions about this money and how Reform was keeping going across the election period?
Well, it's a really interesting question you ask. On the 2nd of June, the day before the day before Farage came back as leader, made himself leader, I had a 45-minute conversation with Richard Tice. It was a Sunday morning. The 3rd of June was a Monday. Sunday morning, Richard Tice and I spoke for about 45 minutes to an hour, and I was discussing the finances of the party. And I was saying, how are we doing? And he said, well, we've got $750,000 in the kitty. We're really hard up against it. And I said, look, I'm happy to donate £250,000 to Reform so that we can make the fight. It's the most I can do, but I'm happy to do it. And he said, that's very generous. He would think about it. There was no suggestion that there was money about to come in from other sources, or that this deal had been done, or that the leadership was going to change the next day.
Yeah, because £500,000 came in the next 2 weeks, didn't it? From Britain's Means Business via Fiona Cottrell.
Yeah, I mean, I was gobsmacked. Were
you not talking to Motash Azami about all of this? He left Reform UK subsequently in part over disagreements about payments and invoices. So he clearly wasn't happy with the way that things were going. I mean, should you not have been asking more questions at the time?
I should have been. I trusted what was going on. And when I look back at it now, and I think Motash Azami's in the same position, you just assume that the leadership is being straightforward. There was no reason to suspect that anything untoward was going on. I did have concerns about the money before I joined the party. I raised them with Tice. He gave me assurances about it. And during the election, I did ask him, is any money coming in from any sources? There was a particular source about which I was worried. Is any money coming in from this source? And he said, no money's coming in. And I said, fine. Okay, fine. And we continued to fight the election. But now it's all being revealed that actually all this was taking place behind closed doors, in discussion with a convicted criminal who apparently, according to Farage, has nothing formal to do with the party. But the deputy leader of the party himself wasn't aware of what was going on.
We're going to have to leave it, Ben, but I mean, just before we do, there will be a lot of people listening to this saying you sound exactly like someone with an axe to grind. This is sour grapes. You fell out with Reform. You left. You went your own way. You started working with another party and led the Advance Party for a year. You are just one of the very many critics who are piling into Reform, trying to make anything stick where you can.
No, it's absolutely not the case. Actually, I can reveal, if it helps you to put aside this false notion that I'm somehow bitter as a result of my experience, I forewarned Suella Braverman to be very careful about joining Reform because of what was happening at the governance level. I brought it to the late Anne Widdecombe's attention, perfectly honest, absolutely straight as absolutely straight lady, about my concerns about what was going on with Reform. I even wrote to the Electoral Commission a couple of years ago about my concerns about Reform. This is nothing to do with sour grapes or bitterness. This actually, to the extent I have an emotion, the emotion is deep disappointment that a project that has launched so promisingly, that held the hopes and aspirations of the British people, that engaged so many in the hope that a bright future would emerge if Reform made it into power, is now falling as a result of these peculiar dealings that took place.
OK. Well, thank you for your time, Ben Habib, who was a former deputy leader of Reform UK at the time that the subject matter that we are discussing was happening. Now, Reform have said this appears to be further misinformation based on either unlawfully obtained documents or mischief-making by disgruntled former staff members, referring to the Sunday Times Insight investigation, which is on the front page of the newspaper today. The spokesman said all relevant repayments were declared to the Electoral Commission and that Nigel Farage's decision to return to frontline politics or stand in the election changed only in early June. He added that Murtash Azami, as the party's then treasurer, had ultimate responsibility for and complete oversight over the party's finances. He controlled the finance team, made the payments and complied and submitted the reporting. Richard Tice and George Cottrell did not respond to requests for comment.